I'm standing under a chandelier, throwing cold sparks over white linen, when my father's voice slices the music. She's just a gate guard. Who would invite her chair scrape? Laughter erupts, relieved, eager mien. No one reaches for my hand. I breathe through my nose the way drill instructors taught us to keep the world small. The groom's father rises from the head table. Compact iron gray still. Dress blues pressed like sheet metal. He lifts his chin. The room changes shape. Knives pause mid-air. The saxophone squeaks into silence. He snaps a salute that cracks like a flag in wind. Sir, with respect, she outranks every one of us here. Glass trembles. Someone whispers, "What my father is still, then not." He sways as if stepping off an unseen curb, sits hard, then topples. The room freezes under the chandelier's steady light. That's the shock. Here is how we arrived. I did not come to be seen. The invitation arrived 2 weeks ago. Cream card with silver script addressed to guest. I set it by the kettle and watched it as if it might explain itself. I RSVP'd, yes, for one reason. The bride once pressed a blanket over my shoulders in a hospital hallway and said I would warm up again. She is kindness in a world that forgets the word. The venue is a renovated train depot, brick and timber. Tonight, it is strung with bulbs and fragrant with gardenias that will outlive the toasts. The guest list reads like a small-town census contractors. Nurses, a dentist who still works Saturdays, a mayor who never learned to whisper. My father, who can price a plowed acre by sight, sits among men who admire a firm handshake more than a nuanced sentence. I enter quietly. Dark dress, neat bun, civilian camouflage. I take a table near the back and let other people's joy soften old arguments. Sinatra tilts into a floor shaker. 2 toddlers invent a tomato-stomping dance. For a while, the night is simply good. You should know this about me. I measure distance in steps. Door to dais 21, table to exit 17, fire extinguisher behind the photo booth curtain. Old habits like that make some people laugh. They make me calm. When my father approaches, I smell pine aftershave and the high sweet of champagne he doesn't usually drink. He rests a hand on the empty chair beside me, as if it belongs to him. "This your seat?" he asks loud enough for nearby ears. "It is," I say, folding my napkin. "Smooth the linen, keep your elbows in, your voice stays even." He leans toward a cousin and says, "She's just a gate guard. Who would invite her?" The cousin studies his plate. Laughter comes anyway, nervous and obedient. A few who, like my father, laugh too long, as if the sound could buy space in his ledger. I look at the bride near the cake, a slice poised on a tiny gold shovel. We make eye contact, a rope tossed across a small canyon. She glances at the head table. I follow her gaze. He is not large, the groom's father. Not large, but the air understands he is there. He has been smiling the polite smile of someone who knows when to be background. When he stands, the smile folds away like a pocket knife. Dress blues tell where they've been. His speak of tours that don't need recounting at a wedding. He does not look to the mayor with the big laugh or the banker who tips too well. He looks at me the way one professional sees another, straight on steady. He steps out from the head table button line like a plumb bob. He does not hurry. He stops with exactly enough distance for respect. Salutes live a long time in the body. The elbow remembers angles. The wrist recalls the set. His salute snaps up and holds. In the quiet, someone drops a fork. The sound is not loud. It is precise. "Sir, with respect, she outranks every one of us here." The sentence doesn't shout. It doesn't need to. It is a key in a lock that's been sitting in the door for years. At the bar, a woman with a wheat stalk tattoo stills her hand. The bandleader presses 2 fingers to his temple. A grandfather nudges his hearing aid. My father blinks 3 times the way he does when a tractor stalls for no clear reason. Color lifts out of his face like steam from a kettle. He sits, then slides. Someone says, "Call 911," but the bride reaches him first and lays 2 fingers to his neck. "He's breathing," she says. I do not move toward him, not because I am cold, because experience teaches you to go where you are useful. The cousin who knows sugar crashes brings juice. The aunt with a calm voice talks about fresh air as if it were a gift. The groom crouches by my father's shoulder and says a son-in-law thing that lands in the heart. I gather 3 breaths and let them out slow. Then I look at the Major General and give the smallest nod. Not gratitude for spectacle, gratitude for clean truth spoken at cost. He returns the nod like passing a baton with no fingerprints. The DJ stands frozen. I lean in and say, "Play something everyone's grandfather knows." He cues Glenn Miller. The saxophonist exhales. A toddler resumes stomping tomatoes. This is the picture you carry forward: a man on the floor, not injured, but awakened. A room remembering its manners. A bride who thinks with her hands. A groom's father who interrupts comfort with respect. And me measuring the distance to the exit, 17 steps, and choosing not to take it. If you're listening for anger, you may not hear it. You will hear something older, the ache of a promise families make about what counts as success. Tonight that promise meets a different definition. Not louder, truer. There is more to say about invitations addressed to guests, about what a gate is, about who decides what matters when the music stops. But first, the room needs to breathe, and so do you. We will keep the story moving and keep it honest. That is how truth stands up, salutes, and is seen. I grew up where the county fair was a calendar event, and the 4th of July parade decided who was doing right by this town. Our street ended at soybeans, and the church lot doubled as overflow parking for Friday night football. My father could name every family on our road and the price they paid for their houses. He respected men who stacked hay straight and women who never forgot a casserole dish. He believed in 2 kinds of people, folks who built something you could point to and folks who didn't. He used to run his palm over a new fence board and say, "You can feel straight." Then he'd glance at me, measuring things I couldn't hold up. I learned early that silence was safer than theory. When I brought home library books about logistics and maps, he tapped the cover and asked if the book could fix a leaking faucet. When I said it could show you how to get help faster, he smiled like I'd told a decent joke. We were a 3-bedroom ranch with a carport and a basketball hoop that wobbled when the wind turned. My sister Lacey was sunlight hair that brightened rooms, a laugh that made boys send notes folded like footballs. She floated through cheer practice and returned with glitter on her cheekbones, stories in her pocket. Teachers wrote "gifted socially" on progress reports, which seemed like a compliment, even if nobody knew what it meant. I was steadier weather. I kept lists: mileage on the mower shelf, life on the pantry cans, birthdays of every uncle who claimed not to care about birthdays. I set alarms and labeled chords. While Lacey worked on promposals, I learned to change a tire and practiced reading street names without moving my lips. She thought it was funny. My father thought it was less than useful. The year Mom got pneumonia, I kept a chart above the washer times for medication notes about temperature, who brought soup. Dad stood in the doorway with his cap in his hand. "You don't have to turn the house into a hospital," he said. I didn't tell him the chart kept the fear from spilling. I just moved the pen to the next box. At church potlucks, the grown-ups arranged themselves like unspoken seating charts. Contractors, with contractors, teachers, with teachers, farmers, with whoever could talk seed. I sat where the ushers needed me. If a table rocked, I found a sugar packet to steady it. If someone dropped a serving spoon, I wiped the handle and returned it bowl down so the handle wouldn't sink. It wasn't virtue. It was habit make things work. Lacey dated boys who smelled like cologne samples and borrowed their father's trucks. They planned lake weekends and took photos with their hands on each other's shoulders, thumbs tucked just so. My father loved those boys. He loved their certainty, the way they talked about future square footage. When one of them lettered in baseball, Dad put the program on our refrigerator. When I passed a certification exam for emergency communications, the paper went in a drawer because the refrigerator should be for family. At 16, I had the best attendance record at the volunteer firehouse's community CPR nights. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I wanted to know where the power shutoff was on every street. I memorized the difference between the sirens. Dad said, "You don't get paid for that." I said, "I sleep better." He shook his head. Lacey put a hand on my shoulder and asked if I could help her sew a loose button. We were different species that somehow shared a kitchen. He wasn't mean, not the way people mean when they fling things. He just believed the world fit a pattern, and if you didn't match the pattern you were writing checks, nobody would cash. He thought success was visible. A truck without rust, a ring shining under fluorescent lights, the kind of job people understand when they ask, "So what do you do?" The most generous thing he ever said about me was, "She's responsible the way you might describe a reliable mailbox." The summer before graduation, I got a job at the county fair gate with a fluorescent vest and a clipboard. "There's your calling," Dad said not kindly. "Gate guard." I liked it. The flow pleased me. Scan, stamp, wave forward. I learned to spot the guy who would argue about parking from 30 yards out and to find the grandma who needed a chair before she asked. At night, I could feel the lines I'd moved, breathing more easily in my chest. One afternoon, a storm rolled across the soybean fields like a pulled tarp. The midway lights glowed against a bruised sky, and a vendor's tent broke its stakes and went airborne. I grabbed 2 teenagers and a farmer in bibs and shouted to anchor the corners. We pulled the canvas down, weighted it with water jugs, and bought 3 minutes for a little boy to be found by his mother instead of by the wind. No one awarded medals. The funnel cake stand gave me a coupon, and the fair board sent a thank you email with the wrong spelling of my name. I kept it anyway. At graduation, Lacey's boyfriend shouted her name and held up a sign. When they called mine, I saw Mom clap until her knuckles whitened. Dad nodded once a contractor approving a straight line. At home, he put Lacey's sash on the mantle. He put my folded program in a drawer. Some drawers are not cruel. They are merely quiet. Recruiting brochures started showing up in the mail, slipped between community college catalogs and coupons. The Marine Corps booklet didn't smile as wide as the others. It showed people doing difficult things with clean posture and muddy boots. The words around the pictures were about leadership and logistics, chain of command and mutual respect. They said nothing about being seen. They spoke about being counted on. I didn't announce my visit to the recruiter. I went after my shift at the pharmacy, where I stocked bandages by size and brand until the rows calmed me. The recruiter didn't sell me on glory. He asked me what I kept track of. I told him distances, times, names, the way crowds move. He said, "So you notice what matters before it squeaks?" I said, "I try." He said there was a place for that. At dinner, I put the brochure next to Dad's plate. He read in silence, then tapped a photo of a sentry at a gate. "There you go," he said, and went back to his meatloaf. I wanted to tell him the gate is the first promise a base makes to its people. I wanted to tell him that a straight fence means nothing if the latch is careless. Instead, I cleared the plates. The day I raised my right hand, Mom wore her good sweater and cried quiet, the way practical women do when they're proud and frightened at once. Lacey took pictures on my phone because mine were steadier. Dad shook the recruiter's hand, said, "Bring her back better than you found her," and told me to text when I got where I was going. Later on the porch, he said, "People who sign up don't always come back. You hear me?" I said I did. He looked out over the soybeans and added, "People who stay learn to mind their business." I said I heard that too. In those last weeks at home, the town threw a small send-off at the VFW hall. They gave me a sheet cake with a flag piped in frosting and a card signed by neighbors who used the same pen. Old men with stories that didn't need correcting told me about the buses they'd boarded when they were my age. One of them took my elbow, leaned in, and whispered, "Stand straight when it's easy, so you know how when it's not." I wrote it down that night line by line, so I would have something to read when the easy days ended. Lacey took me to the thrift store and held up blouses with care labels I could ignore. "You'll need something." "Not green," she said. I told her I'd still be me. She laughed and said she'd know me anywhere. We ate cherry pie at the counter and practiced not crying. On the drive home, she asked if I was afraid. I told her I feared not earning the trust I was asking for. She said she feared unused talent more than hard roads. We were not the same, but for a minute, the radio found a station we both liked. On the morning I left, the road out of town looked the same as the road in 2 lanes, ditches full of Queen Anne's lace, a tractor taking its time. Dad didn't wave. That wasn't his way. He stood with his hand on the mailbox as if steadying it against a gust. I remember thinking a mailbox does not choose what it receives, it only holds it straight. Not everything in a life needs to be a metaphor, but some things volunteer. I counted the miles to the interstate and did not look back, not because I was finished with them, because I wanted to be the kind of person who returned different in the ways that matter and the same in the ways that count. It would take years and rank and rooms that fell silent for that to make sense to him. I didn't know that then. I just knew the turn signal clicked like a metronome, and the road, straight enough to feel true, kept going. I arrived at Paris Island in air so thick it felt like a rule. The bus door opened and heat slapped us. Comfort isn't the point. A drill instructor's voice cut the night. No metaphors, just orders stacking until our thoughts lined up like boots under a rack. We learned to breathe in fours. A wall locker was a mind map. If your socks salute, your head will too. I wasn't the fastest or strongest. I watched. I noticed which recruits burned too bright in week 1 and which saved breath for the last mile. I noticed the girl from Utah who wrapped her blisters in silence. I learned her grandmother's name and reminded her to drink before she asked. Leadership was ordinary kindness applied on time. Rifle week tasted like metal and pine. My first grouping looked like weather spread and nervous, but repetition is quiet courage. By Friday, the shots lived closer together. The instructor said, "Consistency beats talent when talent wanders," and I copied it into the notebook Lacey hid in my duffel. We drilled until right felt like north. I failed a land nav checkpoint, then found it with minutes to spare because I trusted the compass more than the small voice asking for an easier bearing. The map didn't care how I felt. It cared that I read it. Mail calls separated the loud from the loved. Some recruits received stacks that smelled like home. I got one from Mom with a cartoon heart, one from Lacey with jokes and a playlist. None from my father. I wasn't surprised. I folded both into the notebook and made a rule: don't confuse silence with absence. Graduation felt like standing inside a drum. The band punched the air, white gloves flashed. When we threw our covers and caught them again, Mom's face turned to light. Lacey screamed my name. My father shook the drill instructor's hand, then mine. "Well," he said, "you finished what you started." Not a benediction, but not nothing. Boarders sent me to a coastal installation where wind could flip a cover if your chin strap got lazy. My first post was a gate. If that sounds small, you haven't stood in a lane while night trucks breathe diesel and the world tries to enter without permission. The checklist was strict eyes, hands, voice. Verify IDs, scan mirrors, read faces, read hands again. A base is a promise. The gate is where you keep it. On my third night, a contractor van rolled up with a decal slightly off-center. The driver smiled too hard. His paperwork listed a building that didn't receive deliveries after 2100. It was 2117. I waved him to secondary and radioed the supervisor. Nothing illegal, just sloppy. Sloppy at the perimeter is how bad stories start. The sergeant said, "Good catch." I said the checklist did the work. He shook his head. "Checklists don't notice a shrinking decal," he said. "People do." Most nights were unremarkable in ways that protect families sleeping on base. I learned the regulars by their taillights, which civilians forgot sponsor paperwork twice a month, which young Marine hid fear beneath sharp jokes. I waved through a colonel even when he'd lost his sticker because it was faster to memorize the plate and drop a copy at his XO's desk at 0600 with a gentle "Next time, sir." The gate gave me teachers no syllabus listed. A retired gunnery sergeant with Sunday donuts taught me to look at hands first, not eyes. "Eyes lie," he said. "Hands tell the plan." A corporal from Louisiana taught me to hear drunk before I smelled it. The sergeant of the guard taught me that a bored Marine is a risk. We rotated hourly and turned the last 5 minutes into a quiz. Off duty, I took classes. Communications, emergency management, the dry stuff that keeps large things from falling over. I wrote 2 letters a month, small stories for Mom and Lacey, larger truths for Dad. I told him how many vehicles we processed per shift and how long it took to clear a line when a scanner hiccuped. He replied, "Once. 30 seconds matters if you're baling hay in the rain." I saved it. When hurricanes trained in the Atlantic, even people who don't listen started to listen. We sandbagged low doors and rehearsed moving families to the gym that doubled as shelter. The power failed in a clean snap. Generators came late and then steady. A toddler cried because darkness changes a room's shape. I told her the gym had a superpower. It could hold a storm without spilling. After the storm, we checked off-base housing. A woman with a busted porch light tried to hand me $20 for hauling limbs. "For whatever comes next," she said. I slid it into my notebook not to spend, but to remember that people are trying even when they hand you the wrong thing. Promotion came in. Increments, a ribbon, a stripe, a line on an eval that said, "Calm under pressure." People think big moments build you. It was the small ones, a night with no drama, because we fixed a badge printer at 1,700 instead of 2,300. An inventory that matched the binder because we counted twice. A quiet, 0300 talk when a young Marine admitted home didn't feel like rest. My supervisor asked if I'd considered the officer route. "We need leaders who don't mistake volume for authority," he said. "You make people better without making them smaller." The idea scared me in the clean way a higher bar does. I said I'd think about it and keep showing up squared away. He said that was most of the work. One evening, after a 12-hour shift and a sunset, the color of good oranges, I touched the cool post on my way out. The metal thrummed from passing trucks. I thought of my father and his fences, straight lines, hinges that don't sag. A town believes in a parade because someone closes a road on time. A base believes in itself because someone checks a badge and means it. A gate is a promise on purpose. I was proud to keep it. I didn't plan a career. I planned the next right standard. The officer route began as a dare to myself. If you believe order can be merciful, prove it where it matters. I studied at a folding table in base housing while a neighbor's television bled sitcom laughter through the wall. I ran in rain because rain doesn't ask permission. At officer candidate school, everything was a test of attention, wearing the mask of exhaustion. I learned how authority sounds when it isn't pretending, short, specific, proportionate. The instructors didn't want louder followers. They wanted quieter leaders whose decisions held when no one was watching. I kept my notebook dry in a zip bag. On the inside front cover, I wrote, "Make people larger." My commissioning photo shows me squinting into light I couldn't control. Second lieutenant, small gold bars, big responsibility. The Marines sent me where moving pieces became lives, logistics, and operations. Trucks fuel, chow comms, muscles of a body that only looks heroic at the tip. I made routes that didn't cross themselves. I watched generators the way some people watch sunsets. I learned that a late forklift becomes a sleeping bag someone doesn't have. My CO taught me to think 10 minutes, 10 hours, and 10 days at once. "You don't get points," he said, "for solving a problem you created by not checking a gasket." Field exercises ran on redundancy and patience. Radios went quiet in the One Valley maps, always exaggerate. We sent a runner because runners don't need batteries. A convoy lost time to a bridge weight limit hidden in footnotes. We rerouted on the fly with 2 calls and a hand-drawn overlay. No one clapped. That's the point. A Marine eating hot chow after 12 hours doesn't need applause. He needs the spoon not to snap. I loved building days that worked. At home, I mailed a photo of the commissioning to my parents. Mom put it on the mantle until a cousin's baby announcement needed space. Dad called to say the collar looked heavy for July and to ask if the insurance on government trucks covered hail. He wasn't cruel. He was practical on a narrow street. Lacey texted a string of emojis that meant proud in a language we shared without needing subtitles. I saved the emojis and the practicality both. The first time I signed for more equipment than my first car had cost, I felt the weight of a surname on a dotted line. A sergeant with tobacco-stained fingers said, "Ma'am, check the serials like your name lives there." We did. 1 crate number drifted. We found it before drift became loss. That night, I wrote a memo on standardizing hand receipts that was so plain, the XO laughed and then adopted it. Boring paper saved loud headaches. I slept well. When the hurricane season made good on its annual promise, we forward-staged supplies south of where social media guessed the landfall would be. Our maps didn't care about guesses. They cared about culverts and school gyms that could hold 1,000 cots without buckling the bathrooms. Wind ate the coast anyway. The morning after we built a chain of trucks that looked like a lessen potable water MRE's tarps generators. A sheriff with a face like old leather said the parish roads were tired, which meant broken. We crossed them slowly and didn't add weight to the parts that wanted to fail. At a nursing home, where the backup generator coughed itself hoarse, a nurse handed me a list of names with medication circled. The air inside was a held breath. We had one working lift, 2 ambulances, a deuce and a half, and a mile of flooded street that reflected a gray sky too well to trust. We built a relay. Marines carried EMTs, stabilized a corporal who had once fixed outboard motors, coaxed a temperamental pump like an old friend. A woman with a cardigan, buttoned wrong, said her husband used to drive the school bus. I told her the road would remember him. We didn't lose anyone. 2 days later, a state official took a photograph with a bullhorn. I filed our after-action report at midnight with the generator schedule printed in bold. The report traveled. I didn't. I grew into captain and then major, the way a jacket breaks in slowly, then all at once, you don't notice the seams. I learned what to ignore volume theatrics and what to never ignore fatigue in a good Marine's eyes. A quiet ma'am, quick word. My fitness reports use phrases like steady hand and anticipate second-order effects. Those are not fireworks words. They are foundation words. Foundations let other people dance without worrying about the floor. The policy change I'm proudest of isn't something you'd put on a poster. At 3 different installations, we had the same near-miss visitor lanes clogged at shift change because badging offices closed at 1600 while traffic peaked at 1630. It felt like weather until you put it on a chart. I shifted hours, cross-trained clerks, and posted a sergeant at the choke point with permission to adjust lanes based on live counts. 10 minutes of average delay disappeared. No one wrote a thank you. A corporal got to daycare on time. A visiting general once complimented the neatness of our map board. He didn't know we'd saved a life that morning. A young Marine had shaken in an odd, contained way at muster. His hands told the plan. They were saying not okay. I pulled him aside, slid into small talk until the ground stopped moving beneath him, and walked him to help. Later, the company gunny stopped by my office and put a coin on my desk. For noticing, he said, "It lives in the same zip bag as the notebook. Some coins are for doors you open in other people." When promotion brought me to Lieutenant Colonel, Dad sent a text that read, "That's above Major," right with a thumbs up. It was the funniest way he knew to say he was trying. I told him yes, and that the collar felt less heavy in July than he'd think. He asked if the truck still had to be signed for. I said we sign for everything we mean to keep. He said good policy. Near the end of a long tour, a conference put me in the same room as leaders whose names show up in articles you can't read without pausing between paragraphs. A Marine in dress blues I didn't recognize shook my hand and said he'd been a lance corporal at the nursing home operation years before. He remembered the pump, the cardigan, the way I divided people into teams without raising my voice. That day made me want to be someone else's. "Calm," he said. I told him he already was. "I'm not going to give you a montage. Careers aren't forward only. They corkscrew." I had days when timelines slipped, when a good plan met a petty obstacle, and the obstacle won for a while. I had nights when the radio hissed like a snake, and I wanted to throw it in the nearest canal. I called my mother and listened to her talk about church bake sales, because the world needs both bread and batteries. Lacey married a man who listens and sends me photos of their daughter making forts out of couch cushions. My father sent a picture of a straight fence and wrote, "Still holds." I wrote back, "So do we." Colonel came with an office door that stayed open and a chair people used because they trusted theirs wouldn't be pulled out from under them. I wore dress blues. More often spoke at ceremonies. I would rather have run behind the scenes and mentored lieutenants who were better than I'd been at their age. I told them my finest hour looked like tarps on a truck and a checklist that caught a drifting crate number. I told them the most important thing you carry isn't rank, it's other people's confidence. By the time a promotion board looked at my file with the seriousness of people measuring where responsibility will do the most good, I had a life built on small, correct things. You can draw a straight line from a county fair gate to to a base gate to whichever room will eventually fall silent when someone says my name and means respect, not spectacle. That line isn't fame. It's function. It holds. I came home on a Tuesday in late September when the soybean leaves had gone the color of old brass and the county crews painted new fog lines that would fade by spring. The airport smelled like coffee and mopped tile. Lacey met me at baggage with a cardboard sign that said Auntie in glitter because her daughter had insisted we be official. My niece ran into my knees and asked if I had brought any jet engines in my suitcase. I told her the TSA frowns on that. Lacey put a paper crown on my head that said Queen of Checklists and whispered, "It was either this or tiara with suction cups." I wore the crown to make the child laugh and because humility wears better when you don't try too hard. The house I grew up in looked smaller as most houses do when time has pressed them with its palm. The mailbox leaned a little. Dad hadn't noticed or hadn't cared. The basketball hoop wobbled in the same wind. Mom had painted the kitchen a softer yellow than before. When I set my bag down, the floor knew me. I don't mean it creaked in my direction. I mean it held the way good wood does when you trust it. Dad came in from the back with work gloves tucked in his belt. He looked me over like a contractor measuring a doorway. "You're thinner," he said. "Hope you're not skipping meals to make weight." It was his version of concern. I said the chow line still works. He nodded and glanced at the clock as if we had something scheduled. At dinner, he asked if the truck still needed to be signed for, and I said we sign for everything we mean to keep. He grunted in a way that meant the answer passed inspection. Lacey's daughter asked if the Marines let you have dessert. I told her they insist on it when you've done your homework. Mom tried to smooth the evening with pie, but pie can't fill every gap. The next morning, Dad drove me into town to pick up a spare part for the mower, a ritual as old as the mower itself. He waved to people the way men who've stayed, waved 2 fingers lifted off the steering wheel, an economy of greeting. At the parts counter, a clerk I'd known since school told Dad he was lucky to have his girl home. Dad said she's passing through. His pride was a tight knot tied inside a different language. We stopped at the diner for coffee. A laminated menu stuck to my sleeve and the waitress called everyone honey because it was policy. A farmer in a cap with seed corn embroidery asked me what I do now. Before I could answer, Dad said, "She's in management," which sounded like an apology for the lack of a product you could carry to a truck. The farmer said his boy worked nights at the distribution center and was hoping for a shift that matched the school bus. I told him I respected men who knew how to make hours fit. He said, "Not everyone did." The coffee tasted like Tuesdays. Lacey's fiancé, Caleb, proposed on a hayride in October. He runs a small electrical shop and coaches JV basketball. He wears clean boots and looks people in the eye. Dad liked him immediately. "Builder," he said under his breath, as if the word itself belonged on a mantle. The wedding planning took 3 weeks to hit gear. There were linens to choose chairs to rent a bakery to court, as if buttercream were diplomacy. I tried to stand where I was useful. I made spreadsheets and measured the church fellowship hall. I checked the capacity limit against the fire code posted by the exit sign and dodged the looks that said I was turning a party into a logistics brief. The first tension arrived, wrapped in paper the invitation list. Mom wanted to include the Sunday school teachers. Lacey wanted space for Caleb's team. Dad wanted the people he respected, which meant those whose names came up when he talked about weather and work. My name floated around the edge of the conversation, as if it might be too bright or too dim, depending on who turned it over in their hand. "We can keep it small," I said. Lacey rolled her eyes. "You think small?" she said, "because you've only ever had to be big where it counted. Let me have big where it doesn't." The second tension was a seating chart that looked like a chess problem. Dad wanted to place me near the door so you won't feel trapped, which sounded like care, until he said, "And so we don't make a deal of things." I told him I preferred the end of a table because I could pass plates faster. He said, "See," and acted as if he'd been right all along. A week before the wedding, I mowed the yard while Dad fixed the mailbox. He set the post straighter, tamped the dirt with his heel, and squinted down the line as if he were sighting a rifle. "I expect you'll be in uniform," he said. He meant he wanted a story to tell the breakfast crowd. I said I planned to wear a dark dress and sit where I was put. He didn't argue, but his mouth did the thing it does when he thinks a person is ignoring good advice. A uniform makes things simple, he said. People know where to look. I told him I didn't need eyes to prove I existed. He said nothing. We worked until the sweat dried. 2 days before the wedding, a storm threatened the tent delivery schedule. I called the rental company and learned their dispatcher had broken a wrist. We adjusted drop-off times and borrowed an extra set of hands from the church youth group. I slid $100 to the driver and told him it wasn't a tip. It was fuel for goodwill. He laughed and said goodwill runs lean. Dad watched from the porch and said I was bossy in a polite way. I told him that's called leadership where I work. He grinned like he'd found a nail that finally fit a board. The rehearsal dinner took place in the VFW hall under flags that had seen more arguments than the sign-in book would admit. People told stories into a microphone that popped on certain consonants. Caleb's coach said he was the kind of man who stayed for cleanup. The mayor kept it short because he'd learned it doesn't pay to be first and long. Dad stood to make a toast and said too loudly, "Lacey's the beauty." She always was. He gestured toward me, too broad, too general, and this one's organized. Laughter hopped like a stone, skipping water, then sank. I smiled the way you smile when someone is trying in the only language he has. After dessert, the groom's father landed like a quiet decision. I had never met him. He wore a suit that fit without trying, and shoes that remembered polish. His handshake was clean. "I'm Mark," he said, "Caleb's dad." He didn't fill the air with small talk. He asked me how many chairs fit comfortably in the fellowship hall without blocking egress. I gave him the number and the reason. He nodded satisfied in a way that had nothing to do with social ease. "You run on standards," he said. "So do I." He didn't say Marine, and neither did I. He didn't ask rank. He asked where the first aid kit would be stationed and where we'd hold people if lightning forced a pause. I told him. He smiled without showing teeth. "Good," he said. "Then if the music stops, the night doesn't." We talked for 6 minutes, and in those 6 minutes, I recognized a rhythm. Nothing in my town had taught me, and everything in my work had confirmed respect walks in on quiet feet. The morning of the wedding, the sky behaved. I pressed my dress and my hair and my palms against each other until the edges met. Mom pinned a brooch at my shoulder that had belonged to her mother. "For steadiness," she said. Lacey kissed my cheek and got lipstick on my jaw, then wiped it with a tissue and tears. Dad checked his watch as if the ceremony depended on second hands. He pulled me aside and said, "Don't make today about you." I told him I never do. He said, "Well, good." It was not an argument. It was a ritual performed by two people who don't share a dictionary. At the church, ushers in borrowed jackets lined up like intentions. The sanctuary smelled of wood polish and flowers that had come farther than some guests. The organist warmed up scales that sounded like a lawnmower learning to sing. I checked exits and counted rows, then told myself to stop counting rows. Lacey's daughter spun in her dress until gravity reminded her who's in charge. Caleb stood at the front with the look of a man who knows which switch controls which light. I took my seat near the back, not because Dad suggested it, but because vantage points matter. A woman I'd had algebra with sat beside me and asked if Marines get weekends. I said even oceans rest between tides. Dad walked past to his seat, tipping his chin at acquaintances with the approval of a man who had arranged a fine showing. When he reached the aisle halfway up, he paused and turned. His eyes found me the way men find a distant fence post, squinting, unsure until the light cooperates. He opened his mouth, closed, it opened it again, and kept walking. The ceremony was clean. The vows were not theatrical. They were honest. The officiant didn't tell jokes that would wilt by Monday. He asked the right questions and waited for answers. When we spilled into the fellowship hall and the band pulled a first song from the air, I thought briefly that the day would stay in its lane. You already know it didn't. The fuse that burned toward the line began as small talk and champagne. It found oxygen in old habits. It burst as fuses do in a shower of a sentence my father thought was a joke on sale for the room. You know the words because you heard them at the start. She's just a gate guard. Who would invite her? Laughter obeyed the oldest rule of nervous systems, follow the loudest voice. What you don't yet know is what the groom's father had been watching all evening. He had been counting exits. He had been measuring chairs. He had been noticing hands, not eyes. He had been waiting to see if the room would keep its promise to itself. When it did not, he stood. He did not rush. He set his glass down so the stem didn't rattle, stepped from his chair as if answering a roll call, and faced my father without heat. The band stopped. The drummer knew the sound of authority when he heard silence. "Mark," someone at the head table whispered. He scanned the room like a perimeter. Doors, windows, choke points, looked at me once and squared to my father. "The room needs truth," he said, "and truth tonight needs manners." My father tried a smile that fit poorly. "We're celebrating," he said. "No need to make a fuss." The groom's father stepped one pace forward. Dress shoes on a rented floor, the sound small but final. He came to attention, spine a straight line, and raised his right hand. The salute snapped up, edge clean. Laughter scattered like moths in a porch light. "Sir, with respect, she outranks every one of us here." The sentence slid across the room like a level on a board, showing what straight meant. A bottle paused mid-pour. A child stopped spinning. A man who had prepared to chuckle let the air out. My father blinked and tried to make it a joke. "Outranks," he said. "She was a gate guard at the fair. Clipboard and a vest." The groom's father didn't lower his hand until the salute had lived its full life. Then he let his arm fall and addressed the room, not to embarrass, but to correct. "You're confusing a post with a person," he said. "You're confusing the first promise we make to each other with the last thing you chose to notice." He turned to me. "Ma'am?" I inclined my head. Salutes had been traded. Respect, too. He looked again at my father. "You owe her more than laughter." Silence, the honest kind, settled. Not fear, the quiet of attention doing its work. The mayor reached for his microphone. The groom's father flicked his eyes toward him, a gentle no, and the mic stayed. My father's color slid off. He stepped back and found no chair where he expected one. His knee clipped the seat and he sat hard. A second later, he slid to the floor, the glass rolling toward a table leg. People gasped. Bodies falling always sound louder than they look. The bride moved first, fingers to his neck, eyes on his breath, voice steady. "He's okay. Paper, please." A fan. The cousin who is useless at most things was useful now. He had sugar packets and scents. Someone opened the side door. Air came in cool and honest. I did not rush. Tonight the room needed gravity more than movement. The groom knelt beside his father, then looked up at me. We shared a nod that had nothing to do with hierarchy and everything to do with choice. He stood and faced the guests. "Folks," he said quiet, "we'll be all right if we remember why we're here." He didn't say love. He mentioned steadiness, the way you mention fire exits if you plan to be useful. From the side door came a sound like a book closing. People exhaled, but no one returned to laughter. We were holding something invisible and learning its weight. The groom's father addressed mine again, not unkindly. "You've built fences. You know a straight line when you see one." He tipped his chin toward me. "That's a straight line." My father, now in a chair with a damp napkin on his forehead because a bride knew where to find towels, tried to assemble a sentence. He reached my name and stopped. He did something rarer for him. He stayed quiet. The groom's father looked at the guests. "You don't need her resume," he said. "You don't need acronyms or years. Understand that a gate is where a community keeps its promise to itself. Some of you laughed at the person who kept that promise while you slept. No one looked at the floor. We kept our eyes up." He finished without flourish. "Carry yourselves accordingly." It wasn't a scolding. It was a recalibration you could feel. People straightened without meaning to. He turned to me once more. "Ma'am, if it's acceptable, I'd like to shake your hand." "It is," I said, and we met halfway. His grip was firm and brief. The bride announced water, coffee, a short break, and a return to the dance. The DJ found a song that remembered how to be decent. We did not speak of rank or medals. In a corner, the mayor tried to guess numbers. A woman corrected him with her eyes. The gossip that would have bloomed found no oxygen. My father looked smaller, not because he had shrunk, but because scale is often posture. He held my mother's hand, and her thumb made small circles that have comforted more grief than any speech. He kept looking at me, and then away like a man making peace with a tool he once misused. People returned to plates. The child who had stopped spinning resumed slower now. The groom's father took his seat with the unshowy grace of a man who will never tell this story about himself. The room shifted from spectacle back to supper. I stood and let the ordinary reclaim us. In rescue work, you learn to love that part the moment when adrenaline leaves and gratitude stays. A hand touched my elbow, the bride. "Thank you," she said. I told her she had led with her hands. She laughed and looked at her father. I found my father's gaze again. He held it this time. No nod, no carpenter's smile. He simply stayed. For him, that was a salute. Later, when the band found a rhythm, even the wary could trust the groom's father passed behind my chair and said softly, "If you'll permit, I'd like to talk in a quieter room before the night is over." I said yes. He said good. I owe you something without witnesses. The room, having fallen silent and found itself, began to hum, the way a place does when people choose better manners than they arrived with. We had turned a jeer into a joint. You don't toast that. You protect it. We stepped into a side room off the fellowship hall, the kind used for Sunday school and chili cook-off planning. Fluorescent lights hummed like insects. On the wall, a faded map of the county had pushpins where casseroles had once been delivered. The groom's father closed the door halfway. Not secrecy, just enough quiet to hear ourselves talk. He didn't sit. Neither did I. Standing keeps language honest. "My name is Mark." He said, though we'd already shaken hands. When you work long enough in rooms where truth is expensive, you learn to pay for it up front. "I owe you a few things plainly." "You don't owe me," I said. "I do." He glanced at the hallway and then back at me. When a room forgets its manners, rank reminds it. That shouldn't have been your job tonight. It fell to me because I wear a suit well, and people assume that means I know where the exits are. But the truth is simpler. I recognized a professional's posture across a room and did the thing a decent guest does. I protected the event. I waited. He was choosing words as if they were tools he'd have to put back where he found them. "I also owe you an apology for naming rank at all," he said. "Not because it isn't true, because it risks turning a life of service into a trump card, and I suspect you don't carry your cards like that." "I don't," I said. "But you didn't use it as a weapon. You used it as a level." He smiled without flashing. "That's the aim." He studied the county map, perhaps looking for roads he didn't grow up on. "There's one more debt: gratitude. You don't know this, but my son was on a nursing home move years back after a storm. The after-action report from that operation crossed my desk. It was clean. Your name wasn't on the first page, but I recognize what a firm hand looks like in a messy field. You taught him that calm is a kind of shelter. I didn't know whose calm it was until tonight. Operations are teams, I said. Shelters are too. He nodded. Still, I'm grateful. We didn't shake again. Some acknowledgments don't need repetition. He gestured to the hallway. There's a man out there, learning how to hear himself. I don't know what he'll say. Maybe nothing, but the room already changed shape. That matters. Rooms can learn, I said. People can if we build them a safe place to try. He took a breath the way commanders do when they're about to leave someone with the last word. You didn't correct him to win. You corrected the room to keep it decent. That's leadership. Don't let anyone call it anything smaller. We returned to the fellowship hall. The band found a standard you could trust. Lacey's daughter slept in a chair with her shoe half off. Some nights rest arrives like that only when it's earned. Caleb danced with his mother, two people who know the pace of work and therefore keep time kindly. The mayor made a short speech about community and did not mention himself a miracle I was happy to let pass without applause. My father sat at a corner table with a glass of water and an expression I'd only seen once before when he realized corn borers had beaten his best planning and he needed to call a neighbor before pride ruined the crop. Mom had her hand on his shoulder. She motioned for me. I stopped at the edge of his circle. He looked up at me and then at his hands as if checking whether they were his. When he finally spoke, he started with the wrong sentence and then found the right one. "I thought the world was smaller than it is," he said. "I thought straight lines were all fences and boards. Turns out it's also other things that don't fit on a truck." He swallowed. "Working past a lifetime of knowing where the nails go. They call you ma'am. I didn't hear it. That's on me." I didn't make it easier. Mercy isn't the same as sanding the rough edges off a teachable moment. He tried to laugh and gave up. I said, "Gate guard." Like it was a joke, he said. "I forgot gates are where promises start." He rubbed his thumb across the water glass ring on the table as if it were a pencil mark to erase. "I don't have the words you do. I have boards and weather, but I can say this: I was wrong in front of people. And you were right in the ways that matter, even if nobody clapped." "Dad," I said, because the word itself can be a bridge. "Every post matters. The trick is remembering who we're guarding." He nodded. "I've been guarding the wrong thing. Pride's a flimsy fence." We didn't hug. We haven't been a hugging family. But he stood and we risked an awkward dance, two people finding the beat late and deciding that late is still on time. Before we spun back to the room, he said, quiet as an oath, "I'll do better where I am." That was his apology. It fit him. It fit me too. The night softened. Old men told sensible stories. Young ones carried chairs without being asked. The cake didn't collapse. The bride and groom left through a tunnel of sparklers that never touched anyone's hair. The fellowship hall returned to its honest state. Brooms tables folded lights off in a pattern that meant someone had thought about electricity. Outside, under a sky clean enough to see the county's one bright star, I walked my father to his truck. He jingled his keys and didn't start the engine. "You'll be back when you can," he said. "Bring your notebook. I've been doing the mail wrong for years." "I can show you a better system," I said. He looked at me, the way carpenters look at levels. I figured. On the drive home, Mom said from the passenger seat, "You both did fine. In our family, that sentence is a medal." I slept on my old bed with the dip my body carved at 17. In the morning, I made coffee and wrote a list for the mailbox repair, because promises are best kept with screws tight. Then I wrote another list titled, "What the Room Learned," which is a silly title unless you love rooms like I do. It had 3 lines. Truth needs manners. Respect isn't volume. Every post matters. If you're listening for revenge, you might think it arrived when a major general saluted me. That was a correction. The revenge, if you insist on the word, was quieter and better. A room learned what decency feels like. A father found a straighter line than the one he'd been building, and a family redefined success without mocking anyone else's map. I won't pretend the ending is perfect. My father will say the wrong thing again. So will I. But we've changed our fence line. We've put the gate where it belongs, at the start of our promises, not at the edge of our patience. That's how communities stay worth guarding. If this story finds you with someone you love who counts the wrong things, give them a safe room to learn different. Speak truth with manners. Stand straight when it's easy so you know how when it's not. And if you have a quiet professional in your life uniform or not, thank them for keeping the promises you sleep through. If this moved, you share it with someone who needs a kinder definition of success. Leave a note about the person who kept watch for you. And if you want more stories that honor quiet service and hard-won reconciliation, subscribe and stay a while. There's room here for people who choose decency on purpose.